January 3rd, 1955. Las Vegas, Nevada. The desert air was cold that night, but inside the newly opened Desert Inn, the temperature felt different. Men in expensive suits moved through the casino carrying drinks, watching tables, counting money, and quietly watching each other. Outside, Las Vegas was still a rough desert town trying to become America's playground. Inside, something much bigger was happening. A man named Moe Dalitz was building an empire. He wasn't standing under the bright casino lights. He didn't need to. His name didn't appear on the biggest signs. His face wasn't on postcards. And yet, behind the hotel rooms, casino floors, political connections, and millions of dollars changing hands, Dalitz was becoming one of the most powerful men in Las Vegas. The strange part was how little the public understood about him. To ordinary tourists, Las Vegas looked like a city built around gambling. To Dalitz, it was something else. It was a machine, and he understood exactly how to make it work. But there was one question nobody could answer. How had a former Cleveland bootlegger managed to walk into the middle of the Nevada desert and become one of the men powerful enough to shape the future of Las Vegas? The answer began thousands of miles away. Not in a casino, not in a luxury hotel, but in the streets of Cleveland. Morris Barney Dalitz was born in 1899 to Jewish immigrant parents in Boston. His family later moved to Cleveland, where the young Dalitz grew up around working-class neighborhoods, crowded streets, and men who understood that money could be made in ways the law didn't always approve of. Dalitz wasn't born into a famous Mafia family. He didn't inherit an empire. He built his connections from the ground up. And the first great opportunity came when America made one of its most controversial decisions: Prohibition. In 1920, the United States banned the manufacture and sale of alcoholic drinks. For millions of Americans, that meant closed bars and empty shelves. For organized crime, it meant something very different. It meant opportunity. Alcohol didn't disappear. It simply moved underground, and men like Dalitz understood that people were still willing to pay. Dalitz became involved in the illegal liquor business in Cleveland, helping operate bootlegging networks that moved alcohol through the city and beyond. The business required more than trucks and bottles. It required protection. It required corrupt officials. It required people willing to intimidate anyone who interfered. And most importantly, it required trust. Dalitz learned an important lesson early. The most powerful criminal wasn't always the man holding the gun. Sometimes it was the man who knew who to call. That lesson would follow him for the rest of his life. As Prohibition expanded the illegal alcohol trade, Cleveland became a battlefield for rival criminal groups. Italian gangsters, Jewish racketeers, Irish criminals, union figures, political fixers. Everybody wanted a piece of the money. And Dalitz began developing relationships with men who would later become important to the national underworld. One of them was Morris "Moe" Greenberg, a Cleveland criminal associated with Dalitz's early operations. But Dalitz's world was changing. Prohibition ended in 1933. For some bootleggers, that was disaster. Their entire business model had depended on alcohol being illegal. Dalitz saw something different. The end of Prohibition didn't eliminate organized crime. It simply forced criminals to find new businesses. And Dalitz was already thinking ahead. He moved deeper into gambling, labor racketeering, and legitimate-looking businesses that could hide enormous amounts of money. That was the beginning of his transformation. He was no longer just a bootlegger. He was becoming an investor. And that distinction mattered, because legitimate businessmen could sit in boardrooms. They could meet politicians. They could buy property. They could donate to charities. And they could build relationships without looking like gangsters. Dalitz understood the value of appearances. Then came Las Vegas. In the 1940s, the city was still nothing like the glamorous destination people know today. The Strip was young, the desert was vast, and casino gambling was legal. That combination attracted men from across the country who understood something most ordinary Americans didn't. Las Vegas wasn't just a place to gamble. It was a place where enormous amounts of cash could move through a single building every night. Dalitz saw the possibilities immediately. But he wasn't alone. A network of organized crime figures was already moving into Nevada. Among them was Benjamin "Bugsy" Siegel, the flamboyant gangster who had helped turn the Flamingo into one of the most famous names in Las Vegas history. Siegel's story would end in blood. But the lesson his death taught men like Dalitz was even more important. Las Vegas was profitable, but it was dangerous. A man could build a casino empire and still be killed in his own home. Dalitz preferred a different strategy. He didn't want to become the face of Las Vegas. He wanted to become part of its machinery. That difference would eventually make him far more difficult to destroy. In 1949, Dalitz and his associates became involved in the Desert Inn project. The hotel opened in 1950, and it quickly became one of the Strip's most important properties. But behind the glamorous rooms and casino tables was a complicated financial structure. Money came from investors and lenders connected to the organized crime world. The federal government was watching. The public knew very little, and Dalitz kept his distance from the spotlight. Inside the Desert Inn, celebrities arrived. Politicians visited. Businessmen drank expensive liquor. Gamblers lost fortunes. And behind the scenes, Dalitz built relationships. He understood that the future of Las Vegas wouldn't belong only to the men who owned casinos. It would belong to the men who controlled the relationships between casinos, unions, banks, politicians, entertainers, and organized crime. That was where Dalitz was strongest. He could speak to criminals. He could speak to businessmen. He could speak to politicians. And he could make each group believe he was working with them. But there was another force watching everything: the federal government. The FBI was increasingly interested in the connection between organized crime and Las Vegas. And the more powerful Dalitz became, the harder it was to keep his past hidden. Still, he didn't panic. He had survived Cleveland. He had survived Prohibition. He had survived the violent world of bootlegging. And now he was sitting in the middle of the fastest-growing gambling city in America. He had money. He had connections. He had political influence. And he had learned how to stay out of the headlines. But Las Vegas was about to become much bigger. And with that growth would come a new generation of gangsters, new casino wars, and new federal investigations. Dalitz thought he had built the perfect system. He was wrong, because the most dangerous threat to his empire wasn't a rival gangster. It wasn't the FBI, and it wasn't even the Mafia. It was the money itself. And soon, the people helping Dalitz move that money would force him into a decision that could change everything. The money was everywhere, and that was the problem. By the 1950s, Las Vegas was no longer a dusty gambling town on the edge of the desert. It was becoming a national attraction. Hollywood stars were coming. Politicians were coming. Corporations were coming. And behind the glitter, organized crime money was flowing through casinos, hotels, unions, construction companies, and real estate deals. Moe Dalitz understood the system better than almost anyone. But the more successful the system became, the more dangerous it became. Because now, there were too many people watching. Federal investigators were digging into the finances of Las Vegas casinos. The press was asking questions. And Washington was beginning to understand that the city's explosive growth wasn't happening entirely through clean money. For Dalitz, the challenge was no longer making money. It was making the money look legitimate. That required distance. And Dalitz was very good at creating distance. He rarely behaved like the stereotypical gangster. He didn't need to threaten people in public. He didn't need to carry a reputation for violence. His power came from relationships. One phone call could open a door. One conversation could change a business deal. One introduction could connect a casino owner to a union leader, a politician, or a banker. And behind those relationships was an enormous network of men who had been connected to organized crime for decades. One of the most important figures in that world was Meyer Lansky. Lansky was different from the flashy gangsters people imagined when they heard the word Mafia. He was an accountant of organized crime, a strategist, a man who understood that the underworld could become more powerful when it looked like legitimate business. Dalitz's philosophy was similar. Neither man needed to be the loudest person in the room. They needed to understand who controlled the room. And in Las Vegas, control increasingly meant controlling labor. Casino construction required thousands of workers. Hotels needed employees. Buildings needed unions. And unions controlled enormous amounts of money through pension funds. That money could be invested. It could be borrowed. And it could help finance massive casino projects. This was where the relationship between organized labor and organized crime became so important. The Central States, Southeast, and Southwest Areas Pension Fund, associated with the Teamsters, became one of the most controversial sources of financing for Las Vegas casino development. The Teamsters were led by Jimmy Hoffa, one of the most powerful labor leaders in America. Hoffa and Dalitz operated in very different worlds, but they understood each other. Hoffa wanted influence, Dalitz wanted capital, and Las Vegas needed both. When millions of dollars from Teamster pension funds helped finance casino development, the relationship between organized labor, business, and the underworld became increasingly difficult to separate. For Dalitz, this was the perfect system. Money entered through legitimate-looking channels. Buildings rose from the desert. Tourists arrived. Casinos generated cash. And everyone involved had something to gain. But systems like this always create enemies. And one of Dalitz's greatest enemies wasn't another gangster. It was Senator Estes Kefauver. In the early 1950s, Kefauver's investigations into organized crime exposed connections between criminals and gambling operations across America. Las Vegas suddenly found itself under a national microscope. Gangsters who had operated quietly were being questioned publicly. Businessmen were forced to explain their relationships. And men like Dalitz were no longer invisible. The question wasn't simply whether organized crime had influence in Las Vegas. The question was how much. Dalitz appeared before investigators and denied many allegations of criminal involvement. That was part of the strategy. Never give your enemy the sentence he needs. Never volunteer information. Never become the villain in someone else's story. But the government kept digging, and Dalitz kept building. The desert and became one of the centers of Las Vegas social life. Frank Sinatra performed there. Hollywood celebrities visited. Wealthy businessmen stayed in its rooms. Politicians walked through its doors. The casino became more than a gambling hall. It became a meeting place for America's powerful. And Dalitz was watching all of it. He understood something important. If you wanted influence, you didn't always need to control people. Sometimes you only needed to make yourself useful to them. But then another figure entered the story. Johnny Rosselli. Rosselli was a Chicago-connected mobster with ties to the Los Angeles underworld and national organized crime. Unlike Dalitz, Rosselli had a reputation that followed him. He was connected to powerful Mafia figures and became involved in some of the most sensitive criminal operations of the era. The relationship between men like Dalitz and Rosselli revealed something important about Las Vegas. The city wasn't controlled by one Mafia family. It was a web. Chicago, Cleveland, New York, Los Angeles. Each had its own interests. Each wanted money. And Las Vegas was where those interests collided. For years, Dalitz managed to navigate that world. But there was a hidden danger. The men around him weren't loyal because they loved him. They were loyal because the system was profitable. And the moment the system stopped protecting them, loyalty could disappear. That was the unwritten rule of organized crime. Money created alliances. Fear created obedience. But neither created permanent loyalty. Dalitz knew that. He had seen it before. He had watched bootleggers betray each other. He had watched powerful men disappear. He had watched Bugsy Siegel build the Flamingo and then die violently when his investors lost patience. Dalitz had learned the lesson. Never become too visible. Never make yourself irreplaceable. And never let anyone believe they know everything about you. But there was one problem. The government was beginning to understand exactly how the system worked. The FBI was tracking mob connections. Congressional investigators were exposing casino financing. The Internal Revenue Service was following money. And newspapers were starting to connect the glamorous Las Vegas Strip with the men who had built their fortunes in America's criminal underworld. Then came an even bigger threat. The federal government began attacking organized crime through a new legal weapon. The Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act would not exist until 1970. But long before RICO, federal investigators were already learning how to attack criminal empires through taxes, financial records, gambling laws, and conspiracy cases. That meant men like Dalitz couldn't simply hide behind the word businessman. Every dollar had a history. Every casino had investors. Every construction project had contracts. Every political relationship left a trail. And somewhere inside that trail was the question investigators wanted answered. Who was really controlling Las Vegas? The public saw casino owners. The newspapers saw businessmen. The government saw organized crime, but the truth was more complicated. Dalitz wasn't the only man pulling strings. He was one of several men who understood that the future of Las Vegas depended on cooperation between worlds that were never supposed to meet. And as the Strip expanded, those worlds became impossible to separate. The city was getting richer, the casinos were getting bigger, the crowds were getting larger, and Dalitz was becoming more respectable. He donated to charities, he supported civic projects, he became known as a businessman and philanthropist. The old bootlegger was disappearing beneath layers of legitimacy. But history has a way of remembering what money tries to erase. And behind the polished image was still the same man who had learned his first lessons in Cleveland. A man who understood illegal markets. A man who understood power. A man who knew that the safest position in organized crime was rarely at the top of the pyramid. It was somewhere behind it, where everyone depended on you. But nobody could quite prove why. Then the balance began to shift. The federal government was getting stronger. The old Mafia networks were aging. Las Vegas was becoming too large for the old rules. And a new generation of investigators was beginning to ask questions that the old generation had never been able to answer. Dalitz had spent decades building a world where crime could wear a business suit. Now that world was beginning to crack. And when it finally did, the question would no longer be whether Moe Dalitz had influence over Las Vegas. The question would be whether the city he helped build could survive the secrets buried beneath it. By the 1970s, the Las Vegas that Moe Dalitz had helped build was changing faster than anyone could control. The old underworld was losing its grip. Casino ownership was becoming more corporate. Federal investigations were becoming more aggressive. And the men who had once operated quietly in the shadows were aging. Dalitz was no longer the young bootlegger from Cleveland. He was an older man watching a city transform around him. But his greatest achievement had already happened. He had survived. He had watched other gangsters disappear. Benjamin Bugsy Siegel was dead. Meyer Lansky had spent years fighting investigations into his finances. Jimmy Hoffa had vanished. Johnny Rosselli was eventually murdered. One by one, the old generation paid a price. Dalitz remained. That was not an accident. He had understood something the others often forgot. Las Vegas didn't need a king. It needed men who could adapt. And Dalitz adapted better than most. He moved further toward legitimate business and philanthropy. He became associated with major civic projects and charitable causes. The gangster image slowly disappeared. The businessman remained. But the past never completely disappeared. For years, investigators and journalists continued examining the connections between Dalitz, organized crime, casino financing, and political influence. The allegations followed him even when the public image became cleaner. Yet there was never a dramatic courtroom ending. No final mafia war. No cinematic execution. No police raid that brought the entire empire crashing down. Instead, Dalitz did something far more unusual. He outlived the era that had made him powerful. He watched Las Vegas evolve from a criminally connected gambling frontier into a massive corporate entertainment industry. The city became brighter, bigger, more respectable, and in many ways, more difficult to recognize. But beneath the modern skyline was an older Las Vegas. A city built by men who understood gambling, money, labor, politics, and secrecy. Dalitz was one of those men. He didn't invent Las Vegas, but he helped prove that the desert could become an empire. Moe Dalitz died in Las Vegas on August 31st, 1989. He was 90 years old, and by then the city had almost completely transformed. The old casino bosses were becoming history. Their names were fading. Their methods were being replaced. But their influence remained embedded in the city they helped create. That may be the most unsettling part of Dalitz's story. He didn't need to control Las Vegas forever. He only needed to help shape the system. Once the system was established, it could continue without him. That was the real power of the shadows. You don't have to be seen. You don't even have to be remembered. You only have to build something strong enough to survive after you're gone. Moe Dalitz understood that better than almost anyone, and perhaps that is why his story remains so fascinating. Because the most powerful man in the room isn't always the man standing beneath the spotlight. Sometimes he's sitting somewhere behind the curtain, watching, waiting, making the phone calls, and letting everyone else believe they are in control. Las Vegas was built on bright lights, but its earliest power came from much darker places. And for decades, Moe Dalitz understood exactly how to move through those shadows, without becoming one of the men who disappeared inside them.